Some odd morning at the end of April in 2005, I stepped out of a limousine at 3 o'clock a.m. I was as drunk as I could get, and my wife was standing outside waiting for me like an angry parent. I had just left a CD release party for Mike Jones at a club in downtown Houston. "Boy, she's mad," said the limo driver as I thanked him and stumbled to my door. For about another hour, my wife rambled off at me on how I wasn't myself and how she doesn't understand what has gotten into me. That's about all I remember before I passed out, only to rise again to start my day at 6 o'clock a.m. Now, I'm not a Mike Jones fan, a drinker, nor do I go clubbing. At this time, I was working for a good friend of mine who owns a music distribution company. The company was courting a record label who was planning to launch a CD through our distribution network. The artist was a pretty cool guy, so the owner of our company wanted me to get him involved with some PR opportunities while they was in our city. Since I gave my life to Christ, I find it very hard to personally enjoy events like this. But for the sake of the company, I figure I could take one for the team. I think I may have walked through the club once and went straight back to the limo where I spent the majority of my night. Unfortunately, the limo was stocked with some apple-flavored ale, and I had too much time on my hands. I guess it would have been better for me to remain in the building, because there was no way I would have ever spent money on those high-priced, watered-down drinks the club was serving. I was so out of my element, I remember thinking. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy working with the distro company. Aside from being the minister, I have a natural love for the music industry. Being an artist for over 10 years taught me I definitely better get in on the business side if I was gonna keep that love. Despite that, I was plagued by frustration. Mike Jones was one of a set of local artists who suddenly inherited major national prestige that year. Another one was Paul Slayton, aka Paul Wall, whose first major recording went on to achieve 1 million record sales. Unlike Mike Jones, who I didn't know, Paul was actually a fan of my music. The first time I met him, I was invited to his house by a friend of mine who was his youth minister. This was in 1997, and Paul was excited to meet me as some of the fans are to meet him nowadays. I couldn't understand how God would allow me to have an effect on someone's life who would go on to achieve fame and riches, while my wife and I struggled to raise our kids, staying true to his word. Paul wasn't the only artist this happened with in my career as a gospel rapper. Yet, for the legitimacy of what you read, I believe Paul would be the only one of several who would admit to what I'm saying to you. If he doesn't, then just ask his mother. Hi, Miss Slayton. For 10 years, I was a national artist, not just local. And at this point in my life, I was feeling forgotten. I had stood on stages in front of thousands of people. I had sat at dinner tables with men of high public stature. I had sold thousands of records, preached, prayed, and cried with thousands of people in just about every state. God had called me from mainstream music in the midst of a rise in my career. And now 10 years later, I felt like a failure. Am I heaven's joke? I remember saying in conversations with close friends. Drinking and promoting mainstream music was not an act of unfaithfulness, but it was just me trying to get back to being normal. All I knew was music for over half of my life, and my career started with me dropping out of college to become a rap artist. I worked hard to get myself to the point to where my CDs were outselling Tupac and Bone Thugs and Harmony here in the South. Yet right in the midst of that, God called me to the ministry. I dropped my first gospel rap CD in 1996, and in my city there were very few people rapping for God. During the course of my 10-year run, I served under a major label, my CDs was nationally distributed, and I was nominated for Dove Awards for 2 of those years. Yet here I was a decade later, feeling forgotten and misused. I just couldn't believe God called me to be less successful than I would have been if I would have continued to rap mainstream. It's not about the money, people would always tell me when I saw fit to complain. But when you got 4 kids, a wife of 9 years, and red bills, money has to rank somewhere in your list of what's important. In my mind, I had it all figured out. God had called me, used me, and now he was done. And although I didn't like the outcome, I was trying my best just to deal with the scenario. There was no unity in my genre at this time. Labels like Cross Movement and Reach Records were pushing hard against the boundaries. They had a network of solid artists and ministers, and none of them even acknowledged cats like me had any positive effect on the genre. I remember thinking on how just a phone call from one of these guys would have given me fuel for another couple of years. I think I may even hit Cross Movement website to reach out to John Wells or Deuce to no response. 2 is better than 1, the Bible says. If 2 get cold, they can warm each other, but the 1 is stuck out. Screw it. I can read the signs, I thought. G.I. had just become Average Joe.